everyone. Welcome back to the Minute Women podcast. My name is Grace.
And I'm Linnea.
And today we are celebrating Remembrance Day. Do you celebrate Remembrance Day?
We are remembering, for sure.
Remembering Remembrance Day. And a tricky one this year because no one's allowed to have ceremonies or
There aren't allowed
like
to be
that.
services for church services or cenotaph services. So, and I think that is really a huge part of military heritage and military culture and obviously part of Canada's culture. So, but we have a very special guest here with us today.
Yeah, to help us remember Remembrance Day.
We have the host of the Let Your SOULTALK podcast, Mr. Kanaar Bell.
Yeah.
He is here with us. And actually, as many of our listeners will know, we did a special little live show last week on Thursday, Pickford and Black. Thank you so much to everybody who came out to see us. And so Kanaar will be there this week. And the Minute Women, we are going to pop down and see the show. And so without further ado, Mr. Kanaar Bell.
Yay.
Thank you. The Minute Women podcast. Can't believe this. No. This is awesome. Thank you for shout out. By the way, there's going to be some amazing guests there. So if you can come out, definitely do. You know, good food, good music, right?
Cheap drinks.
Good old soul talk, right? Cheap drinks. There you go.
Sure.
Yeah, the best fries. We discovered the loaded fries the other night.
Yeah.
And they are
all Haligonians.
Chef's
I
kiss.
think it's like a secret. It's like a sweet little secret that people don't know about.
Yeah.
But the fries at Pickford and Black are like the
Prime.
best fries I've had in Halifax, I think, up there.
excellent.
So do you want to tell our audience a little bit about what your podcast is about, Kanaar?
For sure. So I'm wearing many hats, but the one that has resonated with my community the most is being a spoken word artist, and that's how I tell stories through, creative expression. Stories, real stories, that mirror the lives of real people and just, the journeys of self-discovery. So that's what Soul Talk is about. It's all about bringing like young leaders together, creatives, young people, whoever it might be, just to let their soul talk, let everybody know where they are in that present moment of time, like what they're learning personally, because I think those are important stories to share. And then we just unpack that. So they'll do like a little bit of creative writing, even if they don't usually do that. And then I'll receive it. And it's amazing because I wouldn't even expect for some of these people to write like that, which is going to be amazing. So I form a discussion around that, and then we just unpack it. We laugh, and we just have a good time. It's just that soul talk.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's very cool. Very cool.
Thank you. It's fun.
So I felt that, well, other than it being Remembrance Day, the fact that we have Kanaar on the podcast, I thought that it would only be appropriate to do, I think, the only Heritage Minute that is based on a poem, which is the In Flanders Fields, John McCrae Heritage Minute.
So a beautiful poem.
Beautiful
Very
poem.
Timeless.
It hits in a certain way. And I don't know how much of the poem, of its impact is based on what you already bring to the table. Like, I think everybody already has opinions about the First World War, and everybody already has sentimentality surrounding the events that the poem discusses.
Like, do you mean at the time he wrote the poem, everybody already had these, or do you mean like now?
I think at the time, but even now, I think everybody knows some kind of World War I story, and I think the more you learn about that event, the more that poem means.
Right.
And so it's the poem itself is really quite simple and is quite short. And as we go into it, took him like 20 minutes to write.
Yeah.
Bless him. Talent. Bless him.
And so
He's also a doctor.
He's also a doctor.
Amazing.
Like, he's not a poet by career.
Yeah.
Though he did write a lot of poetry throughout his life because he's, a Renaissance man, turn of the century Victorian gentleman. He wears many hats.
Yeah.
But so we're going to talk about John McCrae's life. Spoiler alert, stories about the First World War are not particularly happy.
Not particularly happy.
Especially when they result in you writing one of the most somber poems that I think most people are aware of.
It's a pretty prolific poem. I mean,
Prolific's a good word.
Yeah, it was a huge part of every Remembrance Day service that I've ever been a part of.
100%.
And and I mean, even through school, like I remember when I was in high school, I recited it like 2 years over like the PA speaker. It's just such a, I know, I'm fancy.
You know, that's crazy. I had a memory before coming here in Flanders Field, and I remember like actually doing something when I was in maybe elementary school, like coloring something about the poem, like trying to represent the poem, like it being a school assignment. So like it's they feed it into the curriculum, right? So
yeah, very much
definitely.
So. I think it's one we've talked about on this podcast before, how education across the country is so different, especially when it comes to learning about geography and learning about history, because I think they try to make it more regionally relevant. Maybe
that became very clear to us when we did a couple of the prairie episodes, because we had no idea
nothing about this part of the country.
And any of our listeners or friends from Winnipeg were just like, "Oh my God, Louis Riel," and we were like,
yes.
"You don't know?" And I was like, "I didn't."
Yes.
But I do think in Flanders Fields is one thing that is across the entire country, like. It's always kind of fed into the curriculum.
100%.
Not in a bad way, but like...
No, and I mean, I can only speak for like Nova Scotia school curriculum, but it seems fairly, I mean, when you look at like programs on Remembrance Day and events over the country and like news, it just seems to be a fairly well-known and remembered poem.
Yeah, and it's accessible. Like, I don't think it bogs itself down in trying to be more than what it is. I think it is a very honest reflection of someone's feelings in a moment, and those feelings happened to be ones that transcended his own firsthand experience.
Well, and it's the fact that, I mean, and I'm sure we're going to unpack this some more, but it's the fact that it's a poem about people dying, about death. Like, that's something that everybody deals with, like at some point, like so it really doesn't, I mean, it resonates obviously with anyone who has like fought in, I mean, that war in World War I or like world wars after that rather, but I think that it also just kind of relates and resonates on a level of, you know, loss.
Yeah, for sure. So we're gonna learn all about the man who wrote the poem and his famous words that we know.
Let's do it.
Is he a Heritage Minute hottie?
John McCrae?
Yeah.
He's not bad looking. I wouldn't.
You looked at him.
He's not in my top.
He's not like
3.
Penfield.
No, he's no Penfield. He's no Penfield. He's no Tommy Prince. Like
Tommy Prince.
Tommy Prince is very good.
Tommy Prince, nice arms.
Very nice arms. Very nice. Do we have an image?
Okay, John McCrae.
He's not
I
bad
see ya.
looking.
All right, Renaissance man. It's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah. He's got a very nice jawline.
Oh,
And Grace,
I see
you
that.
love a man with a good jawline.
I do. Thank you for sharing all of my secrets. I'm not embarrassed at all right now. So John McCrae was born on November 30th, 1872 in Guelph, Ontario.
Okay.
His father was Lieutenant Colonel David McCrae, and his mother was Janet Simpson Eckerford. And John was the grandson of Scottish immigrants, so he's like a second-generation Canadian.
Cool.
His older brother, Thomas, would go on to become a professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins Medical School in Baltimore, Maryland. And his younger sister, Giles? The Scottish, you know, they have funny spellings for names, but,
Get creative with it.
you know.
Yeah.
Julia.
I just think the G is almost silent, like
Heather.
Stephanie.
Yeah, his little sister, Stephanie, would marry James F. Kilgore, which... That's a great name. That's a name I want.
That's a great name for a guy who probably was in World War I.
Yeah, honestly though.
Bond name, like Bond
It
villain
is.
level.
Kilgore.
Yeah, I'd cross the street for sure. I'd go the other way.
Yeah, before I went and hung out with
He
Mr. Kilgore.
exclusively wears trench coats.
And sunglasses at night.
Mr. Kilgore was a justice of the court of the King's Bench, and they lived in Winnipeg.
Oh, very nice.
So, you know, his family's quite successful.
Yeah.
They're quite upper middle class people.
Yeah.
As children, all 3 McCrae kids were educated in Guelph. John was a member of the Guelph Highland Cadet Corps, and in 1887 he earned a gold medal as the best drill cadet in Ontario. John was also a bright student. In 1888, at the age of 16, he became the first Guelph student awarded a University of Toronto scholarship. As an undergraduate at the university's Knox College, so Knox is like Presbyterian, Scottish Presbyterians, he was a diligent student and devoted churchgoer, but also found time to write poetry and remain active in both the Guelph militia with his friend Stephen Leacock, who is a famous humorist who is also featured in our John Humphrey episode. He was like John
Oh,
Peter Humphrey's
yeah.
like good buddy at McGill.
His pal.
yeah. So
Super
this
cool.
guy,
Yeah.
this guy has been in 2 Heritage Minutes, but never
As
had
the
one
friend.
of his own.
Legend.
What does he
No.
do?
He's a funny guy. Like he's
Okay.
like, I do bits, I do comedy, I do.
But is
like,
he also a doctor?
No, he was like a university professor.
Okay.
He did like political cartoons.
Okay.
So he's the original Chronicle Herald guy.
Oh, Michael Theater.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I love Michael Theater.
Very good.
He
Very
just did
funny.
an Alex Trebek cartoon today, and I just got sad
Not
because
to add another thing to the sadness of today, but
I'm not over it.
no.
It's so sad. Yeah.
I saw him from a distance once.
Really?
Yeah, at
Oh,
work,
that's
at
cool.
the Fortress of Lewisburg.
Yeah, the New York Times editorial cartoon was Alex Trebek, and then it was like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Kobe and Chadwick.
Oh, Chaswick Boseman.
Yeah, and it was like they were doing, and then it was Alex Trebek, and they were like around clouds and stuff, and it's just like, oh, make me cry.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a year.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's the understatement of,
Of the year.
2020. It's been a year.
What are we gonna do? You know.
What are we gonna do?
What can you do? So McCrae excelled in biology under supervision of his professor Ramsey Wright, earning highest marks in his second year. In third year, he slipped to second place due to his chronic asthma, which was worsening in the city smog.
Dude, this is my brother. This is my man. I have the chronic asthma. He has the chronic asthma.
You have a natural affinity for John McCrae.
Yeah. We're one of the same.
I also like that he's complaining about city smog in the year 1880,
Right?
1890.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't imagine what smog would be like. Like, imagine how pristine the countryside used to be for
Yeah.
you to go to a city in the 1890s and be like, there's so much
Yeah,
smog.
that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess you'd probably have industrial factories downtown.
Well,
in
I was
Toronto
thinking
at that
coal.
time.
Guelph.
Coal
right?
is
There'd be a
bad. That's
lot
true.
of coal.
So he's studying
Yeah.
in Toronto.
He's studying Toronto, so yeah, there'd be a lot of coal and like trains, and
That's true.
So it wouldn't be. It's not really smog. It's more like
grew up in, like-
black clouds.
I grew up.
Yeah.
I grew up in Oshawa, and that was
Okay.
like, I'd say the main job that most people like worked at, General Motors, right? There was a job
Oh,
that
yeah.
like powered the city, right? So
Yeah.
I was trying to compare, as if to having like a big like factory with subsidiaries,
Right.
Yeah.
around the city, if that would compare. But I don't know, 1980, I wasn't there. So what
Yeah,
can I say?
1880.
I'm just
1880?
We're in
1880,
1880,
sorry,
1880s,
1880,
1890s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm only envisioning like London in A Christmas Carol.
Oh,
with
yeah.
just like the plumes of like smoke that children work in.
Yeah.
That's now what I'm getting. And I'm like, maybe
Yeah.
that is what Toronto was like.
Maybe.
Probably not that far off.
Probably not.
Meanwhile, he was also still active in the military. So
Okay.
he's studying away. He also has asthma and he's still in the military.
What a guy.
In 1893, he was training to be an artilleryman at the Tête de Pont Barracks, today Fort Frontenac, in Kingston, Ontario.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm also wondering what he was given to like help with asthma. Like I'm wondering because I
Oh,
just
what
think now,
treatment
like I
was?
know Ventolin wasn't invented then, and that's like the main drug for like
Yeah.
asthma users. So I'm just,
I have a feeling there probably wasn't.
it's probably just like
medicated.
it was probably just like well, cold air, they would tell you. So
Yeah.
like go outside at night, which they still like when I was a kid, like they'd be like, just go sit outside.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
also
man.
like go in like a hot shower.
Yeah.
Like just
Right.
just anything like that to kind of
break
like
it
help break it up. But yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, because I know
Yeah.
we've done a number of these, especially when the subject of the minute has a bit more money. They usually just tell them whenever it's some kind of either a physical or mental issue.
Yeah.
They're just like take a break. Like
Yeah.
just go, leave for like
Yeah.
a year and
Yeah.
like figure it out and then come back to us.
Yeah.
And in some ways, like, I mean, it seems like they're just pushing you off, but like also that's probably not a bad piece of advice.
It's probably what you needed.
It's true though.
If you
yeah.
had the money to do that, just
Yeah.
like go to the countryside for a bit, and that'll probably help your lungs a
Yeah.
lot.
Yep.
If I had all the money, I'd go to like Iceland, and I'd probably. It was even crazy, like just being in the British Virgin Islands last winter. My asthma, my allergies were like the best they'd ever been. Just being
really?
in that climate, being in like a temperate, like non-changing climate on the
Yeah.
ocean, like it was insane.
Do
Like
you find salt air helps?
I don't know. I grew up on salt air and I still have asthma. So
When I watch American medical commercials that are like, look, salt water drops, it'll cure any cold.
That stuff
I'm like,
sucks.
I live next to that.
Yeah.
I get sick.
It doesn't. Like, I still get sick. Yeah, I don't know. And it is weird. I mean, just even knowing how much things have advanced for, like, because my asthma is, like, pretty severe. Like, my lungs are smaller than they should be. And so I've, like, had it since I was a baby. But just even knowing how much things have advanced since I was little, just like, I just feel so bad for this guy. Got so much sympathy for him.
So much.
He's having a rough go.
Oh my goodness. On that same note, sorry, I have to drop this.
No, please do.
Just in terms of like your struggles with asthma,
Yeah.
you know what I mean. And like, I think there was a very important cure that's being
For
delivered
COPD,
for cystic fibrosis.
Cystic fibrosis and like COPD.
Yeah.
It's what is the drug called?
My bad.
Because Jeremy from Sick Boy Podcast shared the news last night
that's
and
exciting.
like broke down and like Jeremy I've like met him at Lawn Summer Nights fundraisers and things, and he's just super lovely.
Yeah.
And to just like see how just like the relief of like knowing that it's a
There
drug
could be a
that
drug on the
well
horizon.
the drug exists, it just hasn't been accessible to Canadians.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
So
I see.
it's that it's now going to be accessible to Canadians.
Yeah,
Trikafta.
You should
that's
look at
what
just the joy, you know, just on the
Like,
same
look
note
at-
of like celebrating
so there's
a breakthrough in medicine.
Yeah,
you know?
so if you look up Trikafta, there's this really cool kind of like Skype call happening with a bunch of people who have cystic fibrosis, and just the picture, just like, I mean, they say picture's worth 1,000 words. It really is, because everybody just looks so happy.
I know, it's
That's
amazing.
so nice.
Yeah, no, I am not by any means like that severe, like with my lung issues, but yeah.
No.
Well, it must be like really interesting to live through a medical change like that. Like I don't have any kind of chronic illness, thankfully, that like impedes my life, but I can only imagine like being told something your whole life of like, this will be either the thing that kills you or it will be just the thing that like haunts you every single day. And then suddenly someone being like, it might not have to be like that anymore.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Can I get an amen?
yeah, it's just like, I can't imagine
Yeah.
the relief. Like, I think it's a relief I'll never know.
No, and I
Who's
like
to say? But
well, and I just think about medical advancements that have happened. Like, I mean, a huge one is AIDS. Like, and I mean, I know that AIDS isn't cured, but there used to just like not be medication, and so much stigma. And I mean, it used to just be like, if you had AIDS, you were just going to die. Like that was, you just went to the hospital to die. And I mean, there isn't a cure for AIDS, but there's been so many medical advancements that it's something that people can live with, and like, and not suffer from, but like live with, and live a life with, like, and have partners and relationships and not have to be, you know, stigmatized because of that.
yeah,
And I think just stuff like that is pretty cool.
medicine. We approve.
Yeah.
Believe it. We're pro medicine.
We
on
are
this
pro
podcast.
medical advancements.
So John's hanging out at Fort Frontenac. He's being a cadet, learning to be an artilleryman.
Cool.
He loves it. His experience wasn't that of a typical cadet, though. He wrote a letter on July 18th in which he explains that he has like a manservant, and his like room looks over this beautiful river. And I was like, I don't think John McCrae's experience is that of a typical artillery cadet in
I
Kingston.
think John McCrae is very elite in the cadet life.
He comes from a little bit of money, I think.
We must.
Well, we've got a doctor brother. He's a doctor eventually, and then the sister
Mary's good.
Mary's good, so she's taken care of. So they're not putting any money towards her.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Jules, Julia, Stephanie.
Whatever her name is.
John eventually took a year off from school, partly to deal with his asthma, but also to teach at the Agricultural College in Guelph. When John returned to his university studies, he graduated from the University of Toronto with his Bachelor of Arts in Natural Sciences in 1894, and then he entered the brand new Faculty of Medicine.
What are natural sciences? Is that just like
I think that's
medicine
like
stuff?
biology.
Okay, like biology.
Like sciences that are not
like
aorganic.
physics? So like not
Yeah.
physics.
Yeah, I
Not
think-
engineering.
I think it would be like biochem, biology,
Cool.
things that
makes
are
sense.
related to humans.
Yeah.
And when he was doing his BA, they don't have a faculty of medicine yet.
Right.
And so as soon as he's done, they found one and he joins. So I think he probably would have been studying medicine from the get-go if he had the opportunity to.
Right.
John graduated with his MD in 1898, winning the gold medal as top student in his class. Following a brief internship at the Toronto General Hospital, he joined a large contingent of top-notch Toronto medical graduates sent by Wright and J.E. Graham, professor of clinical medicine, to study with North America's foremost medical educator. So the Canadian-born doctor and then later Sir William Osler had transformed Johns Hopkins into the leading medical school and teaching hospital on the continent, and he would go on in 1905 to become Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford. John's brother Thomas, who had graduated from Toronto originally, remained at Hopkins as Osler's assistant resident and eventually became one of his close colleagues. So John kind of has like an in with Johns Hopkins, and so he goes and works there for a brief period of time. He spends several months working with Osler before beginning a fellowship in pathology at McGill University in September 1899.
Okay.
So now he's back in Canada.
He's back.
He's back.
Good man.
His studies were soon interrupted by the outbreak of the Boer War in mid-October. Believing that it was his duty to fight, he again took a year off, this time to lead the Guelph contingent of the Royal Canadian Artillery on an active service in South Africa.
So for those of us who aren't history majors, what is the Boer War? I don't know what you're talking about.
So that's where Sam Steele fought. He went to so it's the South African War.
Okay. And this is pre-World War II?
This is pre-World War One. So this
Pre-World
is
War
like
One, I mean, yeah. Sorry.
I think it's 1899 to 1902.
Okay. And Canada was involved in that?
Yeah, so that's like
Okay.
the first war that Canada fights as an independent nation.
Really?
Like we fight as a contingent of the British Army.
Yeah.
But we are represented as Canada there.
Okay.
So
Okay, yeah.
Sam Steele fights there. It's largely a war between British colonists and the Boer, who are the Dutch descendants in South Africa.
Okay.
And it's kind of the fallout of that war that results in apartheid in South Africa.
Right. So
not
Canada's fighting with the Allies.
We are fighting with the British, which there's not really a good side in the Boer War.
Okay.
But the British are really the good side in colonist wars. So, but this is his first
He's out
experience.
there.
Yeah, he's out there. He served with distinction and he was a popular officer. He was quickly promoted to captain and then to major. In one incident, John nearly drowned while crossing a stream on horseback.
Crap.
Dang.
Not good.
It's like, I almost got shot. It's like, yeah, well, I almost drowned while riding a horse.
I just imagine
in a
that
river.
the horse just keeps getting lower and lower, and he's just like on it waiting.
Tally
and that's like how he
ho.
almost drowns, and he just keeps going lower and lower. He's like, oh shit, like I should let's go, little buddy.
Like, maybe this was a bad idea.
It's like the fox and the it's like that fable. It's like the fox and the frog or something. I don't know what it is. And like the like animal fox and the mouse.
Fox and the Mouse.
So the fox is like, get on my back and I'll get you across the river.
Oh.
And the mouse is like, okay. And then the fox like eats it. And it's about like,
Did you know that Chinese zodiac, the order of Chinese zodiac, is based on a tale that is kind of like which animal crossed the river first?
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So like
I'm a dog.
I was rat.
Oh, really?
I am rat.
My mom and I are both dogs, which is kind of cool.
Fun.
Yeah.
That means you'd be
24 years
24
apart.
years apart. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
she was 24. Yes.
Generally, McCrae was shocked by the cruelty and destruction of war, however, which has to be a pretty big slap in the face because like, your dad's a military man. You've been doing this your whole life, and then you
Yeah.
actually go to war, and you're like, oh, wait, it's bad.
As we discussed, he's been doing this his whole life in a pretty cushy spot.
Yeah, for sure.
Like,
for sure.
and now he's just like, oh my God.
Yeah. So he returned to Canada in January 1901, where he gave a public lecture about the employment of artillery during war.
Okay.
After returning to Montreal in 1901, John resumed his medical career, becoming one of the leading academic physicians of his generation, with positions at McGill University and the various teaching hospitals, in addition to a large private practice.
So academic doctor. So this doesn't sound like he's like cutting people open. This sounds like he's teaching about the theory of medicine.
Oh, in terms
Yeah.
of like you thought he was a doctor. Like
Yeah.
So he's a pathologist.
Okay.
So I think he more deals with like diagnoses. I suppose.
Right.
He's not a surgeon.
He's not like a surgeon.
Yeah, but also this is like just shortly after, like maybe 100 years after anyone could be a doctor. So it's just kind of like, who knows what he's doing?
You could
Just
have been a
juggling
doctor.
scalpels in a room.
I could have been a doctor.
Yeah, he's probably cut a few people open.
Maybe some cadavers.
I think you probably have to pass with a medical degree, right?
Well, now you do, but I don't know.
Who's to say? He just sat in a room for 4 years and they're
Yeah.
like, well, you're a doctor. Becoming a doctor is just a war of attrition.
Yeah.
Just sitting there. He was appointed as an associate of medicine at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal and as a lecturer at the university. McCrae also worked as a pathologist at Montreal General Hospital, as a doctor for the Royal Alexandra Hospital for Infectious Diseases, and then he also works for his own private practice. So he's constantly working. He's just like a very prolific doctor. Like,
Yeah.
I think if it hadn't been for Flanders Fields, we'd more know him
Yeah.
as like this
Doctor.
medical genius.
Well, and this makes more sense comparing medical advancements. Like he used to die from the chicken pox.
yeah,
Like we talked about this on a previous episode, that when I had the chicken pox on my 3rd birthday, my mom invited every kid in town who hadn't had the chicken pox yet. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't the plague. It was like, come over, let your kid get infected. Let's all get the chicken pox. Like, and now it's fine. But then like you would have died.
yeah, potentially. I mean, yeah, medicine is horrible. We've already talked about this. It's just like past medicine is really bad. Yeah.
The past is really bad.
The past is bad.
Past sucks.
Until 1911, McCrae took the train once a week to the University of Vermont in Burlington, where he worked as a visiting professor of pathology.
Cool.
So he's also out of town once a week.
Out of town.
On the train. Outgoing, he was also a popular social and literary figure with a large circle of friends. He was a member of various Montreal social groups, such as the Pen and Pencil Club, where he shared his poetry.
Here we go.
man.
So Stephen Leacock and John were founding members of the University Club of Montreal. They chose Canadian architect Percy Nobbs, one of Canada's foremost architects, to design their clubhouse.
Wow.
Which I love that. It's just like, guys, we have to have a really serious meeting. Who's going to design the clubhouse?
It's a serious decision.
I found a really good tree that we could put it in. It's a bit outside town because there's not many left in Montreal. But
How old are these guys by now?
these are men in like their mid-30s.
Go ahead. man.
But what's the secret knock gonna be?
Oh my God. We need a secret
We
knock.
need a secret knock.
And no girls.
Ever.
Absolutely not.
Girls have cooties.
Girls have cooties, and I should know I'm a pathologist.
I diagnose that shit.
I dose that shit on the daily.
Oh, that's funny.
John occasionally published poems in the university magazine. He would publish about 30 in various magazines during his lifetime. So even like leading up to World War I, he's published poems pretty regularly.
Okay.
Most were written in his early 20s, including a number influenced by the tragic death from infection of a girl with whom he was in love. So we have this like gritty backstory
That's
for a
sad.
pathologist.
She probably had the chicken pox.
That sounds like it's like the bad plot of like a like House ripoff, like the show House.
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
like the girl I love died of a disease
Yeah.
that I couldn't diagnose.
Yeah.
And now I write poems by night and
damn.
doctor by day.
Typical story.
It's so hard.
When I'm not working with heavy artillery in the war.
I'm also a veteran of war.
I bet
And I have asthma. Wheezing with love. That's going to be what it's called.
that's his first book of poetry.
Also, not surprisingly, because of his childhood experience with severe asthma, a lot of these poems were about death or the search for oblivion and peace after death. So he's a moody boy. He's
He's
writes
a
a lot
sad
of moody,
boy.
sad poems.
He's a sad boy.
John also co-wrote an 878-page volume entitled "A Textbook of Pathology for Students of Medicine." Oof. That's a long book.
He seems like the type of guy who just loves to surround himself with death in this really like morbid way. Well, no, as a pathologist at that time, like we've been talking about, most of the people he probably diagnosed were going to die. So like you're just completely surrounded by death. Like,
yeah, I guess like if you maybe as having a chronic illness, you're just more comfortable with it. I wonder if he had like really good bedside manner.
But he also served, did he not?
As in the war, you mean?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
No? Yeah.
So,
and then he does say in the poem, right? Like in Flanders, like he talks pretty. He adds a lot of detail to the way he describes like what death looks like in Flanders Fields.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like that he had seen death before, so he just wanted to like he just got obsessed with it.
He's very honest about it.
well, you know, and there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's what I was thinking.
There's
earlier,
something to be said. I don't know what it is.
Well, I don't know, but in the poem, you're right, Kanaar, there's a line that, I mean, even as a kid, like I could really, it's one of the first things I read that really resonated and I could visually see, even though it wasn't a real thing, which is he talks about the torch and like to you from failing hands we throw.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, obviously a dead person can't like kind of like pass like that knowledge or something on to you, but you can learn from that experience and like carry that on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's...
There you go.
Maybe he's got a death complex.
But I think it's
Dude's
also,
got some issues.
Yeah, I think his backstory adds a lot to the poem because it's like, oh wow, like this, it's not only the culmination of like his experience in the First World War. It's this like culmination of a life experience of like, I've suffered from a chronic illness my whole life. I've served in the Boer War. I work as a medical physician. I see death a lot. And this is like a new experience for me.
Yeah.
And like, for this to be impacting me in the way it is, like I'm probably the person most prepared for something like this, and I'm nowhere near prepared for the level of devastation that I've witnessed.
Yeah.
Like, but in 1910,
ooh, turn of the century.
yeah, 19.
Wonderful.
Well, not turn of the century.
We're in a new century.
We're in a
now.
new century.
20th century. Governor General Earl Grey invited John to be the on-duty physician for a canoe expedition to Hudson's Bay and beyond.
There's a Coast Guard ship named after him, the Earl Grey, here in Halifax.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's also
over at the Bedford Institute, the BIO, the Bedford Institute of Oceanography.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a big boat.
It's a big boat. Well, he's only working on a canoe right now.
Yeah, with the original, the OG Earl Grey.
The governor wanted to establish a new rail link to a northern port to more easily transport wheat from the prairies.
Okay.
So he's in town and he's just like,
What?
We need wheat.
And so why is John McCrae like,
They need a doctor.
me? Pick me.
He's a man of adventure.
Oh my God.
He's like, I've been to South Africa. Now it's time for canoe expeditions. I almost drowned last time I was in the river. Not this time. I've learned my lesson. Don't take horses in rivers. Take canoes.
He's learning.
He's learning.
About 30-something now.
Yeah.
You're going to get it one day. You're going to get it.
Gray's group of 38 men, including 23 Cree guides, traveled for 2 weeks from Norway House on Lake Winnipeg to York Factory on Hudson's Bay, where the guides were left. The remaining 15 men made the last 4 weeks of the trip aboard the ice-breaking freight and passenger steamer, the Earl Grey.
Oh, okay.
Aboard which they traveled south to Prince Edward Island and then to Quebec City.
It's not the same boat.
It's probably not the same boat.
But
they're like, hey, we named it for you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
While making the rail line did not prove to be feasible, the trip provided John with ample opportunity to observe the lives of Canada's Indigenous peoples and recorded the information in written word and notebook sketches. During the trip, John entertained the group with his storytelling. He met another writer, Lucy Maud Montgomery, when the Earl Grey's steamship anchored in Prince Edward Island, and the Governor General was a huge fan of Anna Green Gables, so they had to stop.
Aren't we all? Just love that girl.
He's just like the original tourist. Of
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I love Anne.
That girl with the red hair and the braids, it gets me.
And that Gilbert, oh my God.
At this time, she probably hasn't written the books after, so he's probably like, but does she end up with
Will they,
Gilbert?
won't
What
they?
happened? And Lucy's just like, men.
Literally, she's like, did you not get the message of my book?
Have you not
that
read?
I'm annoyed by you?
Yeah.
So when Britain declared war against Germany on the 4th of August, 1914, John McCrae was on a ship bound for England on a rare holiday from his heavy work schedule.
Whew.
Instead of taking the holiday, upon his arrival, he rushed to offer his services to the army. So he learns that there's a war. He's like, get me somewhere where I can participate.
I gotta go.
Yeah, so he's like one of the first Canadian enlistees.
Wow.
When he was 41 years old,
Oof.
yep, and he had resigned from the military 10 years before, so he hasn't been participating in the militias. The way
He's
he
not
had before.
young.
No, he's not. He's
Especially
not a young guy.
in the early 1900s. Like, this is...
You're kind of on the cusp of, like, I think the general rule was they would initially only accept from 18 to 45. So, like, he's...
Well, I was going to say, he's
there.
well past, like, the times middle age.
Yeah.
You don't...
Yeah.
I don't think people are
You
living...
probably live to your, like, 60s at this point in
Yeah,
time.
and he's in his 40s. Like...
Yeah.
Got a sense of duty.
Yeah. He is a very loyal... I think he definitely has that, like, Victorian sense of, like, this is what a man does. And I think a lot of that drives him in a lot of ways. And so he is a bit older, and so they don't want him as an artillery officer because that's what he was serving as in the Boer War.
But he's a doctor now.
But they do offer him the position of a doctor.
Yeah.
So they're like, that would be way more helpful, actually. And he's like, I want to fire big guns.
He's like, I want to blow stuff up, man.
Don't understand.
And they're like, no, you're a healer, John.
I know I'm supposed to heal people, but what if I want to murder? Just for a break. John used his influence with a friend from the South African Boer War, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Morrison, whose middle name is Whipple.
Oh, man. Is he a doctor?
He's a lieutenant colonel. It didn't say he's a doctor,
I was
though.
going to say, because a whipple is a surgery. And I was like, if he invented the whipple, that's pretty cool.
That's the name of what's a whipple?
A whipple?
Do we want to get into it?
So,
I don't know
to
if we
be
do.
completely honest, I only know what a whipple is from Grey's Anatomy, but I know it's a common thing that happens in general
Grey's Anatomy.
surgery. Oh,
It's the original.
no. But I know it's like an abdominal surgery that the general surgeons do, and it's like they do it when they're in first year, so it's not that hard.
Gotcha.
So I don't know
not
what it
super
is.
invasive, maybe.
So maybe if he's, it doesn't seem super invasive.
Okay.
They let George do it in season 1, and I mean, like,
Oh my, George in season 1.
yeah, right?
Can you imagine? So with due to this connection, John quickly becomes a major and then a brigade sergeant, which unofficially made him second in command of the 1st Brigade of Canadian Field Artillery in the Canadian Expeditionary Force.
So he was happy. He felt involved.
He he got skyrocketed up.
Yeah.
John returned to Canada, to Valcartier, Quebec, to prepare to serve at the front. Before he left Montreal, McCrae took his personal belongings to a storage facility, wrote to his family in Guelph, and visited the William Naughton and Son photographic studio, which is where he sat for the portrait that we looked at earlier. So that's like the most famous photo of
him.
John McCrae.
Yeah. That center part, though.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a choice.
Yeah, that's...
Didn't have to be that way.
He's 41. He's busy. He's a
That
doctor.
was a life choice.
He doesn't have time to be stylish.
Well, I was gonna say if he's not busy, he would have just let it fly where it may. But that was a
Plaster
good
this hair to
15
my
minutes
head.
of his life.
So John was sent to Europe with the rest of more than the 31,000 Canadian volunteers in the 1st Canadian Division. The division arrived in France in February 1915 after a brief training period in England. By this time, the fighting on the Western Front had stabilized into a war of attrition. In April 1915, after a short taste of trench life in a relatively quiet sector of the front, the 1st Canadian Division was ordered into Ypres salient, the bulge at the front of the lines on the Flanders Plains, east of the ancient Belgian city of Ypres. This would be the first major action the Canadian Division and John would see.
Right.
So the Ypres salient was a dangerous place for Allied defenders. It was surrounded on 3 sides by enemy forces, and the horrors of war were made instantly apparent to the Canadians. The trench works that John and the rest of the Canadians were moved into were inadequate and abhorred. They were shallow and poorly constructed. They were not designed with drainage, and often shelling prevented soldiers from leaving the trenches. So this meant that the Ypres trenches were filled with shallow pools of water, human excrement, and littered with unburied corpses of soldiers from previous fighting.
So I'm feeling like trench foot was just rampant.
Trench foot, also just like there's a dead body right
PTSD,
here, and I can't get rid of it. Yeah, it's actually really interesting, like the stories you hear from like people who serve there, because like the only way they deal with it is like black comedy. Like there's a really famous story from Ypres where there's a soldier that was sort of buried, but their arm was like sticking out from the bottom of the trench because they can't leave the trenches because they'll get shelled. So they have to be buried in the floor of the trenches, and the arm would be sticking out. And so every morning, every soldier would go by and like shake the hand of this dead guy, and they'd be like, "Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir." Like, I honestly can't fathom how you mentally deal with that every single day.
No.
And that's the least stressful part of your day because you might get shot today. Like, the least stressful thing is that you're living with dead bodies.
Yeah.
So the Second Battle of Ypres began on April 22nd. That day, German forces decided to test a new weapon, chlorine gas. Chemical weapons had been outlawed by international treaties before the First World War. Nevertheless, the Germans released more than 160 tons of the gas from thousands of canisters arranged along the German lines. The Canadians, and especially the French-Algerian troops manning the trenches to their left, watched a mysterious yellow-green cloud appear first over no man's land between the opposing armies, and then drifted with the wind southward toward the Allied lines. The heaviest part of the gas cloud hit the Algerians, the chlorine burning their throats and causing their lungs to fill with foam and mucus, effectively drowning the men in their own fluids. So the Canadians watched in shock and horror as the suffocating Algerians broke from their lines, many of them fleeing toward them in panic, leaving a 6-kilometer hole in the front line on the Canadians' left flank. Germans attempted to move into these positions and encircle the 1st Canadian Division. However, Canadian and British battalions managed to desperately fight off the advance over the following hours with the assistance of isolated groups of French and Algerians. The next several days were marked by counterattacks and engagements trying to fight off the German assault and hold the line. On April 24th, a second gas attack was launched and it hit the Canadian forces head on. While some fled, others tried to protect themselves by burying their faces in the crevices of trenches. However, chlorine gas is heavier than air, and therefore it tends to pool in these kinds of crevices. But many of the others survived by holding urine-soaked cloths and handkerchiefs over their mouths and noses after being instructed to do so by medical officers like John McCrae, who identified the gas as chlorine. The 24th of April attack opened serious gaps in the Canadian lines and forced the retreat of several battalions. But overall, the battered 1st Division held the ground outside Ypres, buying time until French and British reinforcements could be brought in. After 4 days of intense fighting, the Canadians were mostly relieved on the 25th of April. More than 6,500 Canadians were killed, wounded, or captured in the Second Battle of Ypres.
Crazy.
And that's their first engagement. Like, that's the first time they see any conflict in the First World War. And that, I think Ypres is pretty prominent in the Canadian zeitgeist of, like, what the First World War means.
Yeah.
And it meant, like, being put in a situation where you were wholly unprepared for what was on the other side of no man's land. John, as a newly promoted lieutenant colonel, treated the wounds of soldiers at the Second Battle of Ypres. John was also gassed, causing serious damage to his already weakened lungs and severely worsening his asthma. But he continued to work and dress wounds at the Essex Farm dressing station near Ypres, which was no more than a bunker with a dirt floor and with light provided only by lanterns in the doorway. John was particularly affected by the death of his young friend, Lieutenant Alexis Helmner, who was killed by a German shell on the morning of May 2nd. Alexis was a 22-year-old civil engineer and a graduate of McGill University. The two had not known each other in Montreal, but they had they'd grown very close since they'd come. Because I imagine it's like, oh, we're from the same place. Like, we know similar people.
Yeah. Do you know Joe from the bar down the street?
Of course I do. I'm 22 and a civil engineer.
We both live with engineers.
We have three other things
We
about
have a
me.
real opinion about
There you go.
engineers.
There you go.
We both live with
I wonder
engineers.
where I was missing out.
His remains were gathered by fellow soldiers and wrapped in an army blanket and buried in the nearby Essex Farm Cemetery. John was the officer present and therefore needed to officiate his own friend's burial.
Ugh.
Alexis's grave was marked with a simple cross. And the
Don't ask me to officiate your burial, please.
Oh, you're not going to outlive me, bitch. Sorry, that's like the only way to answer that.
It is. No, good for you. Stand up for yourself.
I love you so much. I love you very much.
Yeah. Moving on.
The next morning, John wrote a 15-line poem, which he entitled In Flanders Fields. The exact circumstances of his writing are not known, though there are several popular accounts. Apparently, it only took him like 20 minutes to write the poem. Despite being surrounded by hastily built cemeteries around the battlefield, John was inspired by the red poppies that still managed to spring forth. John called...
All that opium keeps you going, keeps you growing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the soldiers were thinking. They were just like, it's like, should we invest? It's like, grow up, guys. I mean, cemetery or hear me out. John called upon the living to join the war effort so that Alexis and millions of others were not dying in vain. John sent a copy of the poem to the London magazine The Spectator, though it was initially rejected. In December, John tried again to have the poem published, and he sent a copy to the British magazine Punch. In Flanders Field appeared on the December 8th edition, tucked away in the bottom corner of the left-hand page without John's name next to it.
Wow.
Nevertheless, the public did take notice of the poem. So the success of Flanders Fields is largely kind of wrapped up in two things. So for one, kind of as we've already discussed, the poem like definitely captures a certain mood that the British public was slowly aligning with, because it's 1915, and so there's no longer that first year of like, this will be done quick. This is going to be like this glorious thing, and we're all going to like celebrate this like great defeat of the German army.
Yeah. It's been recognized that war isn't fun anymore.
Like
it's not a happy time.
War is not fun, and it's affecting all of us.
Yeah.
Like, we have a home front now. Like, we have to like change the way we live to support this war.
Yeah.
And also like you're hearing news about like gas attacks and Zeppelin raids and even like unarmed passenger liners like the Lusitania are being attacked.
Yeah.
Like every aspect of your life is being infiltrated by this war.
And at this point, like there are multiple casualties that people are hearing about at home on the home front. You know, it's like it's like your friend next door's, nephew died.
Well,
and
even
like
worse,
your brother died.
Even worse, the British in particular, like a big tactic for them was like, if you sign up on the same day, we'll put all your buddies in the same company. It's going to be like you and all your friends. And so if a company goes down, that's like a whole neighborhood gone of all their young men.
Well, I know that in World War II, they wouldn't let brothers be in the same groups in most parts of England. So like you couldn't go with your family because you couldn't lose like two older sons and like a father would all have to go separately because you couldn't like lose everybody for your family. Because from World War I, you learned that. Yeah,
they learned like you'll make new friends.
Yeah.
In Flanders Field was soon being memorized and copied into letters, set to music, and then translated into multiple languages. So it's very quickly picked up upon. The second reason that the poem becomes so popular is because of the third verse, which starts with the line, "Take up our quarrel with the foe." It's the one about the falling torch.
Yeah.
This stanza, unlike the previous two stanzas, and unlike a lot of the poems which had been written up to this point, are not memorials. They're calls to action.
Yeah.
So they're begging the reader to pick up the torch, join the war effort, and not allow the death of these soldiers lying in Flanders Field to be in vain. This sentiment was latched onto not by people, but by organizations. So you have particularly the campaign and the campaign to get the United States into the war. Yeah. So they'll use this stanza in like British propaganda targeted at Americans, and it's like you're letting us down by like not joining and picking up the torch.
Yeah.
So lines of the poem would appear in promotional materials for recruiting, raising money, comforting widows, and it would attack both profiteers and pacifists who are trying to either profit from the war or sit on the sidelines.
Yeah.
In total, the poem is estimated to have raised $400 million for the war effort.
Wow.
It was also in these campaigns inspired by Flanders Fields that the poppy begins to be a symbol for the war and commemorating the dead.
Yeah.
By the time In Flanders Field was published, John had moved to the No. 3 Canadian General Hospital, which was near the English Channel. There were more than 1,000 wounded and dying soldiers at the hospital. The hospital was staffed by friends and colleagues from McGill. Some hardly recognized the exhausted man who joined them, speaking of a drastic change in his temperament. And they said that it was like an icon had been broken, which is just like...
That's devastating.
Which is also like, he's an icon to these people.
Yeah.
And they're just watching this like whole event
just
destroy
the
him.
shell of a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Demanding...
Which sounds like World War I to me.
Sounds like a common experience.
Yeah.
Demanding the highest possible standards of service to the sick and wounded soldiers, he insisted on living in a tent like his comrades at the front and had to be ordered into a heated hut when the winter badly affected his health. He felt the war intensely. Every casualty that came into the hospital was felt by John. So he's just this like huge
It's
empath
devastating.
too.
Yeah.
You know.
He's just a nice guy.
He's just a nice friend. He just wanted to write
He
poems.
just wanted to do
Yeah.
good.
He
you
just
know?
wanted to do good.
Just wanted
Yeah.
to do good in the world.
And now he's here,
Yeah.
trying to do good.
Yeah.
Trying.
By late 1917, after the disaster of Passchendaele in Belgium and the collapse of the Russians, the morale of the British Army was at its lowest. Early in 1918, a friend described John as silent, moody, and asthmatic, which...
That's how people describe me too. It's
damn.
basically my Hinge bio.
It's an exciting life, you know.
What was it again?
That's an exciting friend. to hang out with.
silent, moody, and asthmatic.
So,
But I think it's kind of...
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Silent, moody, and asthmatic.
I just like the idea that he was like, he's so quiet and moody. He's also like still asthmatic. Like, why hasn't he gotten over that?
Yeah,
like,
that's
he's
true,
always been
actually.
asthmatic.
Yeah, what the hell? You can travel the whole world. You worked in all types of industries, and you still asthmatic.
You still got the asthma.
Why haven't you gotten over that yet?
Interesting.
So
Just let it go, John. Just breathe right.
oh, we get it. Oh my God. By this point, John had provided medical care for troops in the British Expeditionary Force for 3 long years. On the 24th of January 1918, he was appointed consulting physician to the 1st British Army, the first Canadian to be given the honor. However, he did not live to appreciate the distinction. 4 days later, he died of pneumonia and meningitis at the age of 45. He was buried with full military honors at the cemetery in Wimereux, France. Bonfire, his beloved horse, was part of the funeral procession. So I guess he like had a new relationship with horses.
After he
this
almost
point,
drowned.
We're not drowning on horses anymore. And General Arthur Currie was in attendance. Nursing sisters found a few poppies to put on McCrae's grave that were because the winter was unseasonably warm apparently that day, and so there were a few poppies that bloomed.
Oh, that's so nice.
So contrary to popular belief, John knew that his poem had become very popular all over the world, and he was very pleased with the acclaim it received.
Oh.
However, little attention was paid to the other poems that he had written, such as The Anxious Dead in 1917.
That rarely happens with artists, though. Like with art, like especially I think in that time, like in poetry and books and paintings and art, like it's usually the guy dies and then it becomes really famous. Yeah. So it is cool that he got to kind of have a moment in that kind of bask
awareness
a bit in
anyways.
that, have that awareness of that you've changed people, you've affected people.
Yeah, and I think it's
your art
because it became like commercial. Like it was a commercial poem, which I think is interesting. Like I find it interesting that it's lost that reputation. I guess we aren't trying to profit anymore.
I would say that I still feel like it as a commercial piece of art, in that it is, it's a poem that you associate with Remembrance Day and veterans and the poppy, which is
branded.
It's branded, yeah.
100%.
So I would say that it definitely is still a piece of commercial art. Such as like Sarah McLachlan's "In the Arms of an Angel" is associated with SPCA commercials.
There you go.
It's art that, you hear it or you think of it and it immediately takes you to a cause.
Cats. But in 1919, the year after his death, the public's interest in all things related to him was reflected in the brisk sale of Sir Andrew McPhail's collection of John's poetry, which was published with a short biography.
Very cool.
Today, in Flanders Field is one of the most well-known poems in the world. John's birthplace is now a National Historic Site. In 2015, John was inducted into the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame for his valuable contributions to the field of pathology. Also in 2015, in honor of the 100th anniversary of the writing in Flanders Fields, a statue of John created by sculptor Ruth Abernathy was unveiled in Ottawa. A duplicate statue is within sight of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, his family's place of worship, and looks out over his hometown of Guelph, Ontario. The red poppy remains a symbol of sacrifice and remembrance in many parts of the world today.
It definitely does.
And that's the story of John McCrae. It's not happy.
It's not happy, but it is.
It's a hero's journey.
It is interesting. Yeah, it's a journey, and it's yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting that
That's a Canadian icon I can get behind.
that's a Canadian icon I can get behind.
Yeah,
He
he deserves a minute.
Yeah, and
He's a part of our heritage.
for sure. And I think it's interesting that he is someone who I don't think would see himself as a poet. Like, I don't think if you had asked him before he had written this poem or before he even went to the First World War, I think he'd be like, I'm a doctor.
Yeah,
I'm a veteran.
yeah.
And as a side thing,
He did start.
I write poems.
He did start a club though, with a
He
clubhouse.
was. He did.
So I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know, yo. How do you think he describes himself? You know, a man who like switches so many different things in life can't go by a title. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Fair.
He's just John McCrae.
John McCrae.
Well, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Minute Women podcast. This very special episode to commemorate Remembrance Day, November 11th. This year, as we mentioned, there might not be services or ceremonies held, but it's always nice to take a moment to remember those who have sacrificed for us in war. And this week, we'd like to direct people towards the Royal Canadian Legion and the National Poppy Fund. You can reach them at www.legion.ca.
And we would also like to thank Kanaar Bell so much for coming onto the podcast. It was so lovely to have you with us today. And we really encourage everyone to go see Kanaar live. It's even better in person.
Yeah.
If you go on to Pickford and Black this Thursday, November 12th, you can see Let Your Soul Talk live.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate y'all having me. It was nice to hear a Heritage Minute.
Yeah.
You can come down and watch the wonderful Kanaar Bell and hang out with your favorite Minute Women. Who couldn't want more?
telling
Who would
ya.
want more?
We'll have to
Let
have
Your
you
Soul
on
Talk.
again for a more like peppy
Yes.
episode. One where we can have
It's
a few
all
more
good.
laughs.
Sometimes, you know, it's needed sometimes, these
Yeah.
episodes.
Well, thank you so much for coming
Of
on.
course. No, I appreciate it.
And actually, we have a bit of a favor to ask Kanaar.
So it would mean so much if you could recite John McCrae's In Flanders Field for us to close out the episode.
Hey, because of how he led his life, I will do so. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scars heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.